Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ryan Lowe, and today we're going to be talking about cutting from two perspectives. One is how to teach your team how to cut a little more effectively if you've got beginners on your team. This is directly in response to Jeff Bussel's question, which is, do you have any tips for teaching players how to cut and change direction with a burst of speed? We have lots of new players and they basically only have one speed: slow jog. I'm totally familiar with that, Jeff, so we're going to answer that question and we're going to follow that with 9 tips for beginners, directly for beginners of Ultimate Frisbee, and how to cut more effectively. These are just guidelines that you can start with and then adapt to suit your team and suit your playing style. So let's go right into the first consideration that I would apply to Jeff's question, which is number 1, player athleticism. How athletic are your players? How quickly can they cut in relation to their own physical potential? So you don't want to be comparing your players to the opponents. You don't want even to be comparing your players to each other on the team. You want to be comparing each player's performance to what you suspect that they're physically capable of. That's a big point. You don't want to be ever making any player feel that their effort is inadequate, because that's just going to breed lower and lower performance out of them. What you want to do is encourage maximum effort, and as a beginning player, you want to exert maximum effort. But I'm speaking first to coaching new players and guiding new players into the game, and the best way I think to encourage maximum effort is to start with a sense of belonging and that sort of team tribe feel. So you welcome them into the team, you make sure to encourage their catches and pat them on the back for effort, not outcome. Because if they're dropping the disc, that's not a great outcome. But if they tried really hard to lay out for the disc or go up for the disc with a defender and got shut down, or it didn't work out for them, that's a good effort. So try to reward the effort, not the outcome. You're going to get better cuts that way.
Yes, Chili. Oh, nice try.
The second thing you really want to look at is the desire. So going back to the very first point we looked at, which is athleticism. Athleticism develops slowly, and I have videos which you can check out. Maybe I'll link to one of them below this so you can see workouts that you can work on or get your players doing to make them more explosive and more powerful and faster and more agile. That takes time. That takes months and years to see improvement there. The second thing I'm going to point to here, though, the second consideration, is desire, and desire gets improved immediately. So if you have a player who's physically performing below their capabilities, increasing their desire is going to likely bring that effort they're willing to invest in the cut up closer to the edge of their ability. And that's where they're going to show the most improvement. And if you have a lot of players on the team performing at the edges of their abilities, you're going to experience from season to season a lot of improvement on a team level. And that's going to make your team more fun to play with. It's going to make your whole team more competitive. Everyone's going to have a great time because they're going to have that sense of progress. So fostering that desire and fostering that want for the disc is really what we're trying to do here. And the best way I can think of to make your players want the disc is to reward their efforts. Always just focus on great effort, great try, next time, like you'll get it. And over time, they'll grow that confidence and they'll get better at applying that maximum effort because they know it's safe to do so. They know they're not going to get yelled at for dropping the disc. They're in fact going to get rewarded for trying. So that's what you want to work on is as a coach or as a captain, reward the effort, not the outcome. If you want to drill for practicing cutting that I like to use before games, you can check out the blog post, which I'll link to below. It's the throw before you go drill. There are lots of touches in this drill and it's thrown at short range. So you throw, you cut, the person you threw to returns the pass to you, and on the fly you catch it and return it to them. So it's a very handler-centric drill, and it's going to get your players more comfortable with lots and lots of touches before the game. So if you're playing in a recreational league like I am, and you only have players who maybe play for 2 hours a week and no practices, this is a great drill to get lots of contact before the game. So check that out in the video description below. I'll link to the blog and you can check out that throw before you go drill to start implementing these techniques with your team. And with that drill, and with any cutting drill, I always suggest that you try your cuts really slow, like at a walk first, because there's this dichotomy or paradox with new players. On the one hand, they really want to impress their team and they want to earn a spot in a spot of respect in the group through the eyes of their peers. So they want to try, but at the same time, they don't want to fail. So there's this tricky balance where they don't want to, on a subconscious level, they don't want to run too fast, because if they're at a full sprint, they know that the faster they go as a beginner player, the less likely they are probably to make the catch successfully. So that's where you're probably seeing this slow jog coming into play. And I totally used to, when I was a brand new player, I would limit how fast I would run because I really wanted to make the catch. And I knew that I was better at catching at slower speeds. So that's why with cutting drills, it's nice to start at a walk and to establish a pattern of successful catches, successful throws at a walking speed with the whole team, so everybody can get lots and lots of successful reps in. And then you slowly build up the speed so that you're slowly jogging, and then you're jogging quickly, and then you're running, and you're maintaining that high completion rate this whole time. If you see the completions going way, way down, everybody's dropping the disc, dial it down, slow it down, and build your way up gradually to the point where everybody's cutting as hard as they can for the disc and making catches at a full sprint. I think that is a better way to introduce confident full speed catching than having them start at full speed and dropping so many discs and just losing confidence over time. So that said, that's kind of the coaching portion of this video and the captaining portion of this video. The next bit of this video is going to cover the 9 tips that I would directly impart to beginner ultimate Frisbee players on how to cut more effectively. Again, these are guidelines. If your team is running some kind of a horizontal stack or a vertical stack or some other type of offensive pattern that conflicts with these rules, then just do away with what I'm saying. This is more like if you're going to play pickup or you're just new to the game and you need some principles, these are a good place to start. The first one is to cut toward or away from your handler. So if you imagine your handler is a light bulb and they're radiating light rays out away from them, you want to run directly at or directly away from them. You want to spend less time doing zigzags, running like in an L pattern. It's not like football in that you've got all of these complex fishhook style diagonal cuts and plays. Early on, just focus on running straight toward your handler and running straight away from him. It's going to lead in fewer picks as well, because when you start to run more sideways to your handler and doing all these fancy cuts, you are more likely to get in the way of other players, and that's where picks happen, where you're crossing paths with other people cutting and generally becoming a nuisance for everybody else on the field. And it's better when everybody is running in a way that isn't in the way of other people. So that's where the pick call comes in, and I'm sure you'll hear that a lot, and it's not a big deal if you get called on it. You just, try to ask after the pick has happened what you did wrong, just so you can learn and not do it the next time. The next point is to create contrast in your cuts. So instead of running at 80% or 90% of your full run the whole time and gassing yourself, try walking a little bit. Try, if you're playing on a team that's in a stack, just walk or stand in your stack and then sprint as hard as you can all the way to and past your handler and then out, and then slow down again. If you're not playing in a stack, if you're just kind of playing this random game of ultimate, try varying your speeds so that you're stopped or walking and then sprinting, and then stopped, walking, sprinting, jogging, sprinting. That's harder to cover, someone who stops and starts a lot, than somebody who is always kind of running at a jog. It's easy to follow the jog because there's no guesswork. They're just running at a jog. You match the jog, you've got them covered. But if you're always having to respond to somebody who is just like sprinting full out and then like slowing down, that's a harder person to defend. So be that person by creating that contrast. One strong cut, this is the next point. One strong cut is better than a bunch of little cuts. So if I was to be in an area and I was to cut 5 times in like a star pattern, that's really difficult for my handler to throw to because it's unpredictable. And it's also easier for my defender to cover because they just sort of need to be in that area to take me away as an option if I'm making all these little cuts in a small space. The opposite of that is one decisive big cut long or toward your handler short. It's also way more predictable for your handler to be able to throw a lead pass to somebody who is making one straight, like, decisive sprint for the end zone, or one straight decisive sprint to the handler. So that's more predictable and it's a better way to cut. The next point is to create a good target. So by that I mean, if you're running and you're not looking at your handler, they're not going to throw to you. So you need to make eye contact. You need to point to where you're going. So if you are running deep, it really helps to point deep, and they're going to throw to the open space if they see you pointing, because that communicates that that's where you want the throw to go. It's less relevant to point if you're running toward the handler, because likely you're pointing at the handler. That's not going to make sense. So create a target. I can't do it because I'm holding this microphone. I'll set it down. You create an alligator target as you're running at about chest height. And if you're running toward your handler, or if you're looking for a dump, creating that target and maintaining eye contact is going to increase the odds that you get that pass. And shouting, you just shout when you're open. You can shout poached if your defender is leaving too much space, and that's how you get the attention, and that's how you get more passes. Stretch the field. This is the next point. When you are new to the game, you might kind of just want to blend in with everybody else and run around where everybody else is. That's not a good way to get more passes, and it's not an effective way to cut. You want to cut and stretch the field, go all the way to the end zone if your handler can throw that far, and come all the way back to your handler for the short pass, especially when it's windy, because those long passes are trickier in the wind. Next point, finish your cuts. So this is so typical of new players. They kind of feel that they shouldn't run too close to the handler. It feels uncomfortable to be within a couple feet. It might not seem like a relevant place to be, but if you pay attention to the really high-level teams, because the defense is so much more active on the handler, and if there's a zone, maybe they've got a cup covering the handler, finishing your cut means to run all the way to and through the area that the handler and the handler's mark occupy, within a couple feet even. And while you're doing that, you're creating that alligator sort of open hand target for them to pass to. So absolutely, you want to finish your cut by running all the way to the handler. Don't stop 10 feet because that's where other people are going to be cutting to. You run past them, and then when you're clearing out of the way, because you want other people to follow you with their cuts, you don't want to cut back in where your teammates are coming. You cut around and then you clear out upfield, and that can be a long cut. So you point upfield, you shout for the disc, you maintain eye contact, and then if your team is running a stack, you can return to the stack from there and then repeat. The next point is to tailor your cuts to the handler. Your team is naturally going to have players who can throw the length of the field. They can throw super far. If you're interested in learning how to bomb the disc, check out at the bottom of my YouTube video here. I'll have a link to the training that teaches you how to throw long. So I'll include that link to the video description below. But if your players are not yet capable of throwing long, then you don't want to cut the same way for each handler. You want to have shorter cuts and closer cuts and safer cuts for the handlers on your team who are less experienced, and especially if it's windy. Even your experienced players aren't going to be throwing as far in the wind. So account for that. Shorten your cuts for when it's windy, or if the wind's at your handler's back, go extra deep because maybe they could put it there for you. The next point, be the continuation cut. It's much easier to get a throw off before the mark has established on the handler. So instead of being like everybody else on the field, and when the disc is in the air, everybody's kind of watching it to see what happens, to see if there's a turnover or if the catch is complete, assume that the catch will be complete and start sprinting for that next pass. That's called a continuation cut. So be that continuation. You'll get so many more passes. If you anticipate the catch before it happens, when the disc's already in flight, you're already cutting to be that next pass. Once you start to develop that instinct to be the continuation cut, and other players on your team start to do that, your whole team will become much more explosive and fast flowing and difficult to defend against. And the final point comes back to mentality, comes back to mindset. And we already kind of covered it, but you have to be the one who wants the disc. Every single time that the handler gets the disc, they're asking, who wants this thing? And if you want it, you got to cut hard for it. That's all. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.